What does CCHR stand for?
Citizens Commission for Human Rights. They're the only organization in the world today that exposes the dangers of psychiatry, and I have quite a lot of literature from them. Freedom Magazine is always full of it, full of that literature, and I also have a lot of the briefing notes from that time. I have them here, and of course, we went through some of the things such as electric shock therapy. They brought in that electric shock machine made by a company, ironically called Somatics Inc. That's the name of the manufacturer of the ECT machine, you know, if you know. And how drug therapy is being administered to the school children, how Ritalin is rampant, and that the kids are buying and selling it because it's actually a controlled substance, you know. The problem with drugs is that it prevents the body from exteriorizing on one hand, and certain drugs, like LSD, do an involuntary exteriorization of the thetan from the body. Recently I read that some forms of crack were also responsible for involuntary exteriorizations. So there's like a duality here of the inhibitors that prevent, certain drugs inhibit the body, the thetan from leaving the body, and certain other drugs force the thetan out of the body. But it's all bad because you're the effect of these drugs.
We're talking about drugs. Haven't you also had an opinion about caffeine?
Well, caffeine causes AIDS. Well, not causes AIDS, it's the catalyst for AIDS. I personally have some knowledge of this because when I was in Auschwitz, at that time Dr. Joseph Mengele was working on biological and germ warfare. And he developed a virus, which at that time nobody knew what it was called, which would create a imbalance in the immune system, which later on I found out through Scientology was the AIDS virus. It was
You're saying Mengele was one who developed AIDS?
He was the creator of the AIDS virus. And he did it while I was in the concentration camp.
So what does caffeine have to do with it?
Caffeine is the catalyst by which a person who has exposure to the virus comes down with the full-blown AIDS disease. The fact of the matter is, if you have the virus and you don't have caffeine, you can't get the disease. That's true. After the war, when they did experiments,
Which war?
After World War II, when experiments were done by I.G. Farben in Africa with a lot of the natives, and in Argentina, another company did some in Argentina under Mengele. He was continuing these experiments. They were done on two fronts. It was like they were playing the birthday game too, but in a negative way. They actually showed how in control groups, those people that took caffeine in their systems got the disease, while the ones that were never given caffeine but were given the HIV-3 virus never came down with it and were healthy.
How would you find this out?
Well, my case involved, my auditing involved the Mengele business.
So in other words, everything...
I was also party to a lot of briefing, which could be, I was CS for certain briefings on AIDS because of the fact that my time track had a parallel intersection of that area.
You're saying that some of this you learned then on the meter?
Oh yeah. And the rest of it I got in briefings at the org. They had a special briefing, I think it was in January of this year, at the Miami org.
Okay, now back to the psych bust. What was the psych bust? You told us about how you were going to rid the planet of psychiatry.
Well, we were also supposed to do certain things to discredit various suppressive psychiatrists. Writing letters. I had to write a letter, for example, to President Cossiga of Italy about a psychiatrist in Italy who was actually trying to drive the Church of Scientology out of Milan. And my project was to discredit the psychiatrist by making up some stories about some homosexual affair he had, you know, which was easy for me to do because I was the one, I was assigned to this because of my own case. Don't forget, I was the one who convinced Judas Iscariot to betray Christ. Judas Iscariot and Jesus Christ were homosexual lovers. You know that. And I convinced Judas that Christ was having an imaginary affair with another guy, when in fact he wasn't. He was really faithful to Judas. And Judas, in his rage, betrayed him. It had nothing to do with money. It had to do with the fact that he was very much in love with Christ. And that's how Judas betrayed him, because I talked him into it. So it was very easy for me to write the letter to the president of Italy, or prime minister, I forget what he was. Cossiga was his name, indicating the psychiatrist had had a homosexual affair with a nephew of mine, you know. And it was all mocked up. It was a mock-up process. But it was necessary, because if enough people did this, it would discredit the lines of this psychiatrist who was destroying the church in Italy, in Milan.